The year was 1959, and the air on the set of Rio Bravo was thick with more than just the dust of the Texas frontier. John Wayne, the undisputed king of Hollywood, was facing a challenge he never expected, not from a rival studio or a harsh critic, but from his closest friend in the world, Ward Bond. Their brotherhood had been forged over decades of filming together, through late-night drinking sessions and shared victories. But on this fateful day, a line was crossed that would test the very foundations of their loyalty. The Duke, a man who valued professional discipline above all else, found himself in a position where he had to choose between his personal heart and the integrity of his work. Ward Bond was more than just a co-star. He was family to Wayne. They had survived the lean years of the 1930s together, rising to fame as a legendary duo in classics like The Searchers and The Quiet Man. However, by the late 50s, Bond's personal struggles and increasing erratic behavior began to spill onto the set of Rio Bravo. He was missing cues, arriving late, and disrupting the focused energy that director Howard Hawks and John Wayne demanded. The crew watched in stunned silence as the tension between the two titans simmered. Everyone knew that only one man had the authority to speak up, but no one believed that John Wayne would actually turn his back on the man who had been by his side through 1,000 battles. The breaking point came during a pivotal scene that required absolute precision. Bond's lack of focus caused multiple retakes, wasting precious time and testing the patience of the entire production. It wasn't just a professional failure. To Wayne, it felt like a betrayal of the craft they both loved. In a moment that has since become a part of Hollywood lore, the Duke stopped the cameras. The silence that followed was deafening. He walked over to his oldest friend, not with the swagger of a movie star, but with the heavy heart of a man doing a painful duty. The words that left his mouth were sharp, cold, and final. He told the man who had been his brother for 30 years that he was no longer welcome on his set. It was a public execution of a friendship, a moment that shattered the illusion of the unbreakable bond they once shared. For Wayne, the decision was agonizing. He returned to his trailer that evening and sat in total darkness, nursing a glass of bourbon and staring at old photographs of their hunting trips in Mexico. He knew that the industry would talk, and that their mutual friends like John Ford would be forced to take sides. But the Duke believed in a code that was higher than friendship, the code of the professional. He felt that if he allowed his best friend to disrespect the work, he was disrespecting every person who had sacrificed their lives for the motion picture industry. Yet, the hollow feeling in his chest told a different story. He realized that in winning the battle for discipline, he might have lost the most important ally he ever had. In the days that followed, the atmosphere on set was mournful. The chair that Bond usually occupied sat empty, a physical reminder of the void that had been created. Wayne became even more withdrawn, throwing himself into his performance with a desperate intensity. He was playing a sheriff who had to hold the line against impossible odds, and for the first time, he didn't have to act the exhaustion or the loneliness. It was written on his face in every frame. He was learning that being a leader often means being the loneliest man in the room, and that the crown of the Duke was made of thorns as much as it was of gold. Meanwhile, Ward Bond's reaction was one of profound shock and deep resentment. He had always believed he was the one person Wayne would never turn against. He spent those first few days in a haze of anger and regret, waiting for a phone call that never came. He didn't understand that for Wayne, the confrontation wasn't personal, it was a necessity of character. This misunderstanding created a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. The legendary pair, who were once seen as the two pillars of American masculinity, were now two aging men separated by pride, professional standards, and a history that refused to be forgotten. The news of the fallout between the Duke and Ward Bond spread through Hollywood like a brush fire. At the legendary Maskers Club and the smoke-filled booths of Musso and Franks, the industry's elite spoke in hushed tones about the end of an era. How could the two most inseparable men in the business simply stop speaking? John Ford, the man who had discovered them both and acted as a father figure to the entire Wild Goose gang, was furious. He saw the rift as a personal insult to the family he had built. Ford attempted to intervene, inviting both men to dinner under the guise of discussing a new project, but the tension was so thick that the evening ended in a bitter, stony silence. The two brothers, who had once shared everything from whiskey to wardrobes, couldn't even manage to look each other in the eye. As the production of Rio Bravo continued without Bond, Wayne's professional mask remained perfectly intact, but his private life began to reflect his inner turmoil. He became more obsessed with the details of the film, often staying late on set to re-examine every camera angle and every line of dialogue. He was trying to outrun the guilt. Every time he looked at the spot where Ward Bond should have been standing, he felt a sharp pang of regret. He started writing letters to Bond in the middle of the night, long, rambling explanations of why he had done what he did, but he never mailed them. He would watch them burn in the fireplace, the smoke carrying away the apologies he was too proud to speak aloud. He was a man trapped by his own legend, unable to show the very vulnerability that might have saved his friendship. Ward Bond, on the other hand, began to experience a slow, painful awakening. Being cut off by Wayne was like being exiled from his own life. He realized that his behavior had not only jeopardized a movie, but had also wounded the person who had protected him for 30 years. He started showing up at the studio gates, not to ask for his job back, but just to catch a glimpse of the Duke's car driving in. He was looking for a sign of forgiveness, a small nod or a wave that would tell him the bridge wasn't completely burned. But Wayne, fearing that any sign of weakness would undermine his authority on set, kept his gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. It was a tragic game of pride where both men were losing, and the stakes were nothing less than the brotherhood that defined their lives. The conflict took a toll on the rest of the cast as well. Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, who were both looking up to Wayne as a mentor, saw the heavy price of being a leader. They saw that the Duke's strength wasn't just in his physical presence, but in his ability to endure the pain of his own decisions. This environment of suppressed emotion led to some of the most powerful and understated scenes in the film. When you watch Wayne in Rio Bravo today, you aren't just seeing a sheriff defending a jail. You are seeing a man defending his own moral choices while his heart is breaking in slow motion. The film became a testament to the fact that sometimes, doing what you believe is right requires you to give up the very thing you love the most. Behind the scenes, Wayne began to use his influence to ensure that Bond was still getting work on other productions. He would call studio heads and tell them that if they didn't hire Bond for their next big project, they shouldn't bother calling the Duke for theirs. It was a secret protection, a way for Wayne to care for his brother without having to admit he had missed him. He wanted Bond to be successful, to be healthy, and to be the star he knew he could be, just as long as it wasn't on Wayne's own set. This complicated dynamic of tough love was Wayne's way of navigating a world where honor and friendship were often in direct competition. He was a guardian who had to stay in the shadows, watching over a friend who thought he had been abandoned. As the year drew to a close, a sudden tragedy would force both men to confront their mortality and their pride. A mutual friend passed away, and for the first time in months, they were forced to stand in the same room at the funeral. The air was cold, and the grief was heavy. As they stood by the grave, the distance between them seemed to shrink, if only for a moment. They didn't speak, but the shared sorrow of losing a comrade reminded them that their time on this earth was limited. It was a silent realization that the grudges they held were small compared to the vastness of the trail that lay ahead of them. The question wasn't if they would forgive each other, but if they would do it before the final sunset claimed them both. The dawn of 1960 brought with it a sense of finality that neither John Wayne nor Ward Bond could ignore. The silence between them had become a character in its own right, a heavy, invisible presence that sat at every table and followed them onto every set. But destiny has a way of forcing the hands of even the proudest men. In late 1960, the news broke that Ward Bond had suffered a massive heart attack. For Wayne, the world didn't just stop, it shattered. The professional discipline, the rigid code of conduct, and the lingering resentments vanished in an instant. He didn't call for a car. He didn't check his schedule. He raced to be by the side of the man he had called brother for 30 years, praying that the trail hadn't ended before he could say the words that truly mattered. When Wayne reached his friend, the bravado was gone. There were no cameras, no directors, and no audience to witness the meeting. It was just two men, stripped of their legends, facing the ultimate truth. In those final, quiet moments, the years of silence were replaced by a profound understanding that required few words. Wayne apologized for the hardness of his heart, and Bond, in his typical rugged fashion, dismissed it with a weak smile. They talked about the early days, the dusty backlots of the 1930s where they were just two young men with big dreams and empty pockets. They remembered the laughter, the fights, and the unbreakable loyalty that had defined their lives before fame had complicated everything. The Duke realized that while he had protected the integrity of his films, he had almost lost the integrity of his soul. Ward Bond passed away shortly after, leaving a void in Hollywood that could never be filled. At the funeral, John Wayne stood as a broken man. He didn't just lose a co-star, he lost his compass. He delivered a eulogy that moved even the toughest cowboys to tears, speaking not of Bond's career, but of his character, the kind of man who would stand by you in a storm, even if he was the one who started the wind blowing. Wayne realized that their final reconciliation was the most important scene of his life. He began to keep a small photograph of Bond in his pocket during every shoot, a silent reminder that friendship is a fragile gift that must be guarded more fiercely than any box office record or silver trophy. The story of John Wayne and Ward Bond is more than just a Hollywood legend. It is a blueprint for the human heart. It teaches us that even the strongest bonds can fray under the pressure of pride and duty, but they are never truly broken as long as there is a willingness to forgive. Wayne spent the rest of his years carrying the memory of his friend like a sacred flame. He became more patient with young actors, more forgiving of the mistakes of his crew, and more vocal about the love he had for those who walked the trail with him. He had learned the hard way that a man's true wealth isn't measured by the height of his mountain, but by the friends who are willing to climb it with him. As we look back at the cinematic history of these two titans, let us see beyond the gunfights and the grand speeches. Let us remember the two brothers who fought, who fell, and who eventually found their way back to each other before the sun went down. This story is for everyone who has a bridge that needs rebuilding or a word of forgiveness that is long overdue. Don't wait for the final sunset to say what needs to be said. John Wayne showed us how to be a hero on the screen, but in his final act of love for Ward Bond, he showed us how to be a hero in real life. It's about saddling up one last time, even when your heart is heavy, and riding toward the people who make life worth living. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey into the heart of a legend. This 25th chapter is a tribute to the power of loyalty and the enduring spirit of brotherhood. As you go about your day, remember the Duke's lesson: be strong, be dignified, but never be too proud to hold out your hand to a friend. Until next time, keep your chin up, stay true to your code, and keep riding the trail with honor. Because in the end, the stories we tell are just shadows, but the love we share is the light that lasts forever. Ride on, Duke, and ride on, Ward. The trail is waiting, and the stars are bright for the ride home.